Okay, it's time for episode 7, Lucky 7. And as always, it's me, Chucky, from the forums, and Jigsaw, as always, is here with us too.
Indeed, I hope you guys are doing well.
Yeah, so we've got another 5 movies to discuss. Hopefully some interesting ones here for the people out there listening.
Yeah, and tonight's lineup is pretty interesting. First up, we have the somewhat modern-day cult classic Insidious, pretty well-known movie. Following that, we have the 80s classic Fright Night. Following that, our non-horror entry of the week, Only God Forgives, from 2013, a Ryan Gosling movie. Then we have a found footage horror flick from 2015 titled House LLC. And then, finishing us off, we have the 1980 classic slasher Friday the 13th.
First up with Insidious. It's about a family who moves into a new home, and soon after their son falls into a coma following a mysterious incident in the attic. Medical professionals are perplexed as to what is actually wrong with the boy, and we eventually find out that a demon has latched onto the boy and is trying to essentially drag his soul away, weakening it enough so the demon can take possession of the boy, and his parents must find a way of defeating the evil to get their son back. So this is a movie that I feel like after I'd watched it, which was probably not long after it came out on DVD, I kind of wish I had saw it at the theaters, because it's one of these more modern movies that I actually find to be quite chilling, quite terrifying, which is something I can rarely ever say for movies you watch as an adult, whether they're old or new, but especially new movies. It's one of those movies that does tend to give me, some maybe raised hairs on my arms, and I think it has some really clever scares in the actual movie. It's quite a dark movie at times as well. It's also got some really unique, unnerving, winding type of music that plays, and that always helps add to it.
I actually haven't seen this movie in total today. So it's been out for 9 years, and I've just never seen it until earlier today. And to be honest, I wasn't overly impressed with it. I thought it was okay, but given the amount of hype and the amount of individuals, even horror fans, who I know really like this one, I was just somewhat disappointed. I think a lot of this, I think Chuck is right that some of the scares in the movie are somewhat clever. I thought quite a bit of this was just sort of generic jump scare following generic jump scare, and I feel like most of them, if you've seen enough horror movies, you can sort of see coming a mile away. I mean, I liked many of the performances, and I actually thought the story itself was pretty unique, especially toward the end. But overall, I just I was expecting a bit more from this, especially given all the positive things I've heard about it. A lot of this just didn't necessarily do it for me. And I also thought the conclusion about the final, 2 minutes was extraordinarily Hollywood. And it just didn't do much for me. I'm not going to say it's a bad movie, but I was hoping for something else. Not to deflate you.
Well, see, the thing is, I think expectations may play a big part in that, because, see, I saw the movie, I actually didn't even really hear a whole lot about the movie, but, just as I was watching it, of course I knew the movie existed, someone reviewed it on our forum at one point, but I didn't really follow a lot of the discussions about it. I didn't really know anything about it or what to expect. So I just went in watching a movie that I didn't think was either going to be good or bad. I just didn't know, and ended up really enjoying it. And I think the even more important thing is that, we've got all these movies now, like the Conjuring universe. We've got all these movies that's in that kind of franchise that actually borrow and copy a lot from Insidious. I think Insidious is actually the original movie out of all of those. And I know you haven't really seen a whole lot of the Conjuring stuff either. You've maybe seen the first Conjuring and that's about it. But I think all those other movies slightly have a negative impact on this movie just because they've borrowed so much from it, and we're starting to get a little tired of those things. But if this was a standalone movie without the sequels, without the Conjuring universe, I think it would be viewed as an even better movie than it probably is.
Well, I would say, yeah, I would say I think the movie, at least based on what I've read, is pretty decent ratings with both horror audiences and mainstream audiences. So, I mean, I'm not sure how it did in the theaters when it came out, but I mean, I certainly have heard mostly positive things about this one.
I mean, like you were saying earlier about the ending, I'm not sure if you're talking about right before the credits or if you're talking about when they kind of rescue the boy.
I'm actually okay with the rescue scene. I actually thought that was somewhat unique, and to be honest, leading up to that, I was thinking it would probably play out worse than it did, but I thought it was okay. It's actually just the last few minutes with the scary plot twist that pretty much anybody could see coming.
Well, I mean, I'm not so surprised at kind of what was coming there, but I still think it was a really good ending. I actually preferred it the other way around. I thought the rescue scene was a little. I mean, I didn't really have any problems with the demon itself, which I think some people tend to bring up saying, is a bit stupid, but I just thought it was simply, okay, I found my boy, I'm just going to run back, and it just felt like a little rushed or undercooked, or they kind of ran out of interesting ideas to kind of bring the boy back.
Well, I'll say my problem with the rescue scene, and it's not necessarily a big deal, but they're just other. No, I don't know if you call them ghosts or just individuals in this dimension, and they just sort of pop up next to the guy and smile creepily, and like I don't know, it just seemed like a lot of things I can imagine would scare an audience, but I'm just sitting in my apartment and I'm just watching this, and I'm just not getting anything from it. I actually liked I don't know if the character has a name, the sort of rat-faced demon. When he's saving his kid from that, sort of demon's down type thing, I actually thought it was pretty cool. Especially, the demon is sort of like up there listening to music, just sharpening his class, and just, I know, I sort of like that. It has almost has sort of like almost like a Nightmare on Elm Street type vibe, almost. I'm not sure, but I sort of liked that. But some, there are parts of the rescue, like I don't know, like the family that was killed by that one. I don't know. I just didn't get much from a lot of that.
Well, I mean, probably my favorite part in the movie, I think, is when it's roughly about midway through the movie where they're showing the photos of this character just getting a little closer and closer to the boy in the photos, and I don't know, just something about that character, such a mysterious, dark. I mean, we don't really know too much about that character, at least until the sequel, which somewhat ruins the character to a degree, I think, because one movie mistake we see happen is that sometimes movies tend to over-explain something, or
Yes.
they should just leave it mysterious, and which I think is why if you watch this movie and then don't bother with maybe the sequels or anything else in this kind of Conjuring type universe that they've created as an offshoot, I think as a standalone movie, I just find it really creepy.
Yeah, I do. I do agree that the photograph sequence is decent. I guess my main problem with that is, I think as soon as the family moved houses, and we were introduced to the Patrick Wilson's mother. I forget what her name is in the movie, but as soon as we're introduced to her, I sort of feel like we get pretty much the idea that something happened to Patrick Wilson's character back when he was a kid. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, to me, watching, it's sort of obvious that hey, the mother knows something and she's not saying it. And when it finally comes up, that the kid, Patrick Wilson had a past with the same type of thing. Just, I don't know. It seemed to me like they were trying to make it be a surprise, but it just, I don't know, it's not a thing that, I don't know. It just it didn't work that well in my opinion. I mean, the pictures themselves were cool, but sort of leading up to that, I just didn't feel much. Maybe I'm just extraordinarily cynical.
I guess that's the thing with movies. Everyone has different tastes and value different things in movies, and
yeah, I value God movies. To any Insidious fans, I Apologize.
Yes, you gave Cardiac Arrest a 5 out of 10.
If it makes you feel any about it, this movie is going to get a higher rating than Cardiac Arrest. So.
Well, it better.
Yeah, I don't know. I just want to sort of reiterate. I actually like the idea behind the story. I just don't think the execution worked out as good as I sort of hoped it would. I thought there were a lot of really creepy scenes throughout the movie. I mean, I think some of us know some of the more, I guess, well-known ones.
Now that I think about it, I probably should mention Lin Shaye. Her character in the movie is quite good. I mean, she, as many people know, is the sister of the guy that owns New Line Cinema, whose first big movie was A Nightmare on Elm Street, and she's in Nightmare on Elm Street.
It's funny in that too. I actually, as soon as when I was watching the movie, I recognized her face, and I'm thinking, where do I know this woman from? And it turns out it's from A Nightmare on Elm Street. So.
Yeah, I mean, she's been in tons of things now, and especially a lot of more low-budget type horror movies. She just pops up everywhere now. But I was just going to say that it's kind of nice to see an actor who's quite an aged woman now being a centerpiece of a very popular type of horror movie franchise, I guess, even though the sequels, I don't think any of the Insidious sequels are bad. They just kind of lose steam as they go on. You've seen one, you kind of getting a little tired of the formula, I guess, but her character's still always quite nice to see on the screen.
I also want to mention that it is nice, Patrick Wilson's, I feel like he's a somewhat well-known name. I think a lot of people know him from The Conjuring, but he's probably one of my favorite movies, Howard Candy, from back in 2004 with Alan Page, and it's just sort of nice seeing him, I don't know, sort of continue doing a pretty good job. He was by far one of my favorite characters in the movie, followed by, like Chucky mentioned, what's her name, but yeah, so yeah, so I just sort of like seeing Patrick Wilson again, so.
Yeah, I find the movie to be quite creepy. I think it's got some terrifying scenes, some really unique, unnerving type of music, with a very interesting, creepy ghost-type character, if you will. The demon itself is also somewhat intriguing, but doesn't get a whole lot of screen time. Yeah, there's so many good scenes in the movie for me, but I guess the only thing that prevents me from giving it a perfect rating is that I think the movie just loses a little bit of its steam at the end with when they're trying to rescue the boy, and they're kind of running around in a very foggy type environment. There's not a whole lot going on. They're just running kind of around, and I don't know, I just felt like they could have done a little bit more just near the end there. But I give the movie a 9 out of 10. I really, really enjoy it, and I tried to not let the sequels, and especially the Conjuring universe, affect my enjoyment of it, even though I think over time it does slightly a bit.
Yeah, this movie, like I said, I haven't seen it until today, and I was sort of, maybe hoping for a bit more. To me, a lot of it just felt like almost generic jump scare. There were some original, interesting scenes in there, some more subtle scenes, but a lot of it, I was just sitting back like, really, is that supposed to do anything for me? I know, I think Insidious had potential, but it wasn't able to be executed in any way to reach that potential. I would probably give Insidious, I'll probably give it a 5.5. I'll probably round up to a 6. So, I know, I definitely see this as a below average movie that had potential, but it just didn't quite make it.
Get the fuck out of here.
I know. It's I know. That's not actually the biggest disagreement we'll have tonight either. So there's something to look forward to.
Oh no.
So next up, though, I think we have a movie that both of us enjoy to a certain extent. So for a 1985 vampire classic, Fright Night, which is I think a very popular movie among horror fans. In the movie, a teenage boy finds that his new next door neighbors, one happens to be a vampire. And so he, of course, freaks out about this. and tries to get the police onto this vampire. Of course, that's it works. So he goes to a sort of a television horror show host. It's just a washed up guy who used to appear in vampire movies back in the 50s and 60s. Tries to get his help, and eventually he does. And then, of course, the vampires know that this kid knows. So I know it's, in my opinion, it's a pretty wild ride, no matter how many times you've seen it. I would say this before I throw it to Chucky. Fright Night's probably one of my favorite vampire movies. I think it has a very 80s vibe. There's a lot of great scenes in the movie. And personally, for me, there's really no point in the movie when I'm feeling unengaged. It's a movie I've seen many, many times, and I never have any hesitation when I throw this into my DVD player.
Yeah, we know that I'm not a huge fan of vampire movies, but I think this is right up there. I can't really think of any other vampire movies I'd put over it. I think Chris Sarandon plays a pretty nifty vampire. You know, he's got a very different persona, I guess, to what you'd see in a lot of other typical vampire movies. It does have that nice 80s vibe with its music and fashion and everything else. And I think the vampires themselves, at least towards the end of the movie, and you can probably see that from some of the images, there's some really cool makeup going on there, makeup effects. Yeah, so I think as far as vampire movies go, it doesn't get too much better for me. I enjoy the movie. I don't really have a whole lot of negatives to say about it, but at the same time, I don't find it, it's not going to break my all-time favorite list or anything. It's just a movie I enjoy, and I'll certainly rewatch every now and then, but it's just not overly special to me either.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what it is about this movie that works for me. No, just to clarify, I don't find the movie perfect. I do think the main character, what's his name? Ragsdale.
William Ragsdale.
Yeah, I find this character somewhat iffy. The acting isn't the best in my opinion, but pretty much everybody else I enjoy watching, especially Roddy McDowall. I think his character of Peter Vincent is extraordinarily fun. Some scenes that really stand out to me are, the scenes when Peter Vincent finds himself face to face with, an actual vampire trying to fight for his life. The first attack by a character who becomes a vampire, I thought was fantastic. And then he meets the character again later in the movie, and that turns into, in my opinion, a surprisingly emotional scene for like a somewhat lighthearted vampire movie. So I definitely think the character of Peter Vincent really brings this movie a lot of zest, and without that character, I don't think this movie would be nearly as memorable as it is nowadays.
The one thing about this movie that kind of just irks me a little is, growing up having watched a lot of the show Married with Children, and we've got Marcy from Married with Children playing the what would you call it, the object of desire for the vampire.
Does it not do it for you?
Yeah, I'm used to seeing Al Bundy talk about her having no tits and not being an overly attractive woman. I mean, she's just a very plain woman to me. So that's just, I don't know, it's one of those things where you just can't help but think about it, and it doesn't really do a whole lot for me there. Yeah, it doesn't hurt the movie either.
Yeah, I think it was sort of interesting when Chris Sheridan's character, the vampire, sees her and sort of like immediately gets attracted to her. That club sequence, I remember when I was a kid, I thought the whole club sequence was so boring, but watching it nowadays, I sort of like the idea, just slow dancing, with this woman. The other guy can't do anything about it. He tries and he nearly gets his arm broken. And I think it's a very sort of a tense scene. And of course the music also really goes a long way to make that scene somewhat memorable. I don't know. This is one of those movies that it's difficult for me to talk about why it exactly works, but I think so many of the positive elements come together to make at least for me, a really enjoyable experience. And the funny thing is, I actually don't even know if this is my favorite vampire movie, but I do know it's pretty much always in my top 5.
Yeah, I can't think of really any other vampire movies that I'd favor over it. And I certainly can barely think of many vampire movies that I enjoy as a whole. So, to be honest, there's not a whole lot more I have to really say about it. It's an enjoyable movie. It just doesn't do anything much more than that for me. I enjoy it. I don't particularly look to any specific scene and say that was fantastic. I mean, there's a few scenes in the movie that I enjoy. I could say, that was good, but nothing that I would go back and watch just because of that one scene.
Out of interest, do you have any opinions, be it negative or positive, on Evil Art?
I know he's got a bit of a following from this movie. I personally don't really care that much about his character in the movie. I mean,
his dinners in the oven, though.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I saw that actor just recently in another movie. It was like a teen sex comedy. Like he was playing the nerd that these guys were trying to get laid. Yeah, I don't know. It probably fit that role a little more because he is quite a nerdy guy.
Well, apparently, and you may know this, but apparently this same actor has been in a lot of sort of gay porn movies throughout the 90s, which is sort of an interesting fact that I didn't know until today, to be honest.
Yeah, sure, you didn't. I bet you got a few of those movies.
Only like 15.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that at some point, and then you also hear, I think, what's her name? I know her as Marcy from Married with Children, and isn't she a lesbian?
I honestly have no idea. I will say that character actually did do a whole lot for me, one way or the other. Yeah, I guess when it comes to Fright Night, I think a lot of things about this movie work. I think some of the more lighthearted moments, a lot of them including Peter Vincent, Roddy McDowall, I thought they were pretty amusing. The whole scene when they're trying to convince William Ragsdale's character that, the guy's not a vampire, I enjoyed that. Also, like Chucky mentioned, the makeup and special effects are really great, especially toward the, final 25 minutes. There's this one scene where the sort of vampire, sort of deteriorates, his body sort of just falls apart, it becomes nothing but bones. I thought that looked fantastic. I don't know, there's a lot about this movie I enjoy, and when it comes to things I don't care for, it mostly just comes down to a few questionable acting scenes. Generally I really like this one. I'd probably give it an 8.5, and I'd probably move it up to a 9, because it's one I enjoy pretty much anytime I watch it.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy the movie quite a lot. I give the movie an 8 out of 10. I kind of just sneak it into an 8. It's not a strong 8, but yeah, that's where I give it. An enjoyable movie overall. Like you said, it's got some really cool makeup effects, especially towards the end when we see a lot more actual vampire type carnage. Very 80s vibe with its music, and I think Chris Sarandon's got quite a charismatic character that's enjoyable to watch.
On the flip side, speaking about movies that are not enjoyable to watch, what movie is next, Chucky?
Oh man, there's something wrong with you.
This should be a fun one.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Only God Forgives from 2013. It's a movie that centers around a young man named Julian, who's a drug smuggler thriving in Bangkok's criminal underworld. One night, Julian's brother goes out on the town with evil intent, I guess, which results in his death. Then Julian's mother travels to Thailand and compels him to find and kill whoever is responsible for his brother's recent death. Now, this is a movie, I think it's Nicholas Winding Refn, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He also made Drive with Ryan Gosling, who also is the lead actor in this movie. So a lot of people that enjoyed Drive, and there are a lot of people out there who did, tend to go into this movie expecting sort of like a Drive 2, just with a different story. Now, it does have a lot of similarities to Drive in the sense that it's a movie that has very limited dialogue. In fact, I'd say even less dialogue in this instance. But this is a movie where, I mean, it continues the trend of having a really good music, great soundtrack. I think the cinematography in the movie is actually rather beautiful. You know, I mean, you've got a place that, I guess you could say, I mean, you look at the slums and stuff, and somehow they turn that into something visually nice to look at. And it's quite a unique form of storytelling with the limited dialogue that they have. I actually saw this movie in the theaters. Probably be surprised that it actually got a theater run over here in Australia. But yeah, it's a movie that I don't think you can fully appreciate it with one view either. Like, every time I watch it, I tend to enjoy it even more and more. Till I got to a point where I don't think I could enjoy it more. But one other thing that I think I should mention that some people, especially younger crowds, would probably have, they'll probably struggle with, is that I think this is, out of all the movies I've ever seen, a movie that requires or demands 100% full attention to the screen. If you ever look down at your phone or you get distracted with someone next to you talking, whatever it is, I think you may miss something. Yeah, it's just one of those movies where you need to be looking at expressions on people's faces. You need to be focusing on what they're wearing, because in the same scene, suddenly their clothes change. You may not even notice that. And there's a reason for it based on the actual story itself. Yeah, so you got to really try to be immersed as much as possible into the actual movie, which may be difficult if you're not enjoying it from the start, but I think to fully appreciate it and enjoy it, that's what's required.
Yeah, this was a difficult one for me. I've never actually watched a movie that I considered turning off like halfway through until I saw this. Which I know. And I personally feel like I was watching this pretty closely, and it's difficult. This movie looked nice, and the music was decent, and that's pretty much all it has going for it. Most of the characters are entirely unlikable. Even the story itself seems to be lacking context. As far as I can tell, this guy rapes and causes a 16-year-old girl. Then this police guy lets the father kill the guy. Then the police guy gets angry that he killed the guy, then cuts one of the guy's arms off because he has prostitutes as daughters. And maybe I was missing something.
I think there's a deeper story going on that you actually are missing.
There may very well be, but and like you said, maybe this movie requires multiple watches to really get. Though to be honest, when a movie requires you watch it multiple times to fully grasp the story it's telling, I'll question whether or not the movie is worth watching multiple times. I don't know. Plus, the police guy apparently likes singing for his policeman, so I don't know. I thought the movie was interesting. I thought, I don't know, the character that Ryan Gosling plays, Julian, I guess I just don't understand what he was going for. Especially the whole like, hey, you want to fight me scene, and it's dressed up as such like a, I don't know, final showdown type thing. He gets his ass kicked like entirely. And the mother later says, well, he's not much of a fighter. No shit. Like, I don't know. I am happy to listen to opposing views. I will say this one more thing I wanted to point out. The scene in which they have the when Ryan Gosling asks the prostitute to dinner with his mother, the mother sees through that like in 3 seconds. I know that I don't get the point. If he was even going to stand up for this woman, what's the point in even asking her to the dinner? I don't know. There's just so many things I didn't entirely understand. and I feel like this movie is going for maybe a not necessarily more intellectual, but it's definitely a lot of things that weren't fully expanded on in the movie. And while I certainly respect movies that require maybe a little more from the audience, that doesn't necessarily mean the movie itself is worth the additional respect that the audience can give.
Well, we try to keep these segments to a respectable amount of time, so I'm not going to go into any major detail about the actual, what everything in the movie meant, because we could be here for an hour discussing that. But I'd suggest, not just to you, but to anyone out there who kind of watch this and don't really know exactly what the movie is going for, where it's going, or certain parts of the movie, what it meant, but there's definitely videos out there, on YouTube or wherever, where people are actually explaining it. And I don't think there's 100% full, everyone's opinion on what is happening in the movie is actually correct. Maybe just having a look at that, seeing if it provides any clarity, maybe that helps to enjoy it a little more than, I don't know, you probably won't go back and watch it again, I'm guessing.
I guess my thing is, when a movie requires that you, at least for some audience members, when it requires that you watch some additional things to fully grasp what it's going for. And I'm not saying, I'm sure there are people who watch this movie who understood many of the things while watching it. But, I have to imagine quite a few people who watch this who are somewhat lost. And when a movie requires that you go to read other articles or watch videos, I mean, maybe they should have just done a better job making the movie. As opposed to making us go to actually read about this, and then after reading, oh hey, that's why it's a good movie. I know, and I don't mean to come across as overly negative. It's just that, and I also, just to expand, I didn't come into this movie with any expectations one way or the other. I actually liked Drive, but and I didn't necessarily think this was going to be a Drive Part 2, but I certainly was expecting something that had a bit more, I don't know, maybe a more traditional style of telling a story, as opposed to throwing in scenes with unlikable characters and expecting us to get it.
I mean, like I said, I could probably go into what the karaoke meant, and what the constant looking at his hands meant, and
actually, if I don't, if you don't want to do that's fine, but what does the karaoke mean?
It's partly a cultural thing, because in Thailand, especially, karaoke is this huge thing over there, and if you're noticing during the movie, he tends to do it, the character, I think his name is Chang, he is some sort of, we'll just call him God in the actual movie, but that's kind of what he's representing in the movie. And whenever he's doing the karaoke, it tends to be after he's, punished someone with his sword, or he's cleansed someone, and that's a part of it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a whole lot of different things like that in the movie, and maybe just watching someone explain it is a lot easier than rewatching the movie. But I mean, I didn't go look at any of those videos after I saw the movie. I just kept watching the movie because I enjoyed it enough the first time. I didn't overly love it the first time, but then, after the second, third, fourth viewing, it just kept growing and growing on me, and you tend to pick up a few things that you would have missed earlier, and you just keep building on that till you get to a point where you just enjoy the entire movie.
Well, I will say, I think, I forget if it's your, I mean, I'm sure it's a common description, but I do know that somebody called this movie sort of like a love or hate type movie. And I can definitely understand where people get that from. Usually when I watch a movie that people say it's a love or hate type thing, a movie I often hear described that way as the Blair Witch Project. When I watch movies like that, I usually find myself somewhere in the middle. But when I was watching this, and the movie kept going and going, and I watched the whole thing through the credits, and I'm just sitting here wishing for death. I don't know. It's a movie that I wish I liked more, and if anybody would like to call me unsophisticated, by all means. It's just a movie that based on the description, I was hoping for quite a bit more than I got. And I also just want to mention that I liked most of the performances, but the character of the mother, especially that scene when Ryan Gosling's character says, "Oh, he raped and caught a 16-year-old girl," and the mother's like, "Well, I'm sure he had his reasons." Like, as soon as she saw that, like, who cares what happens to her? Like, talk about a despicable character. I don't know. It's a movie I found it engaging, but I found it difficult to necessarily either fully understand what's going on screen, or even, I mean, most of these characters, to be honest, at least for me, I don't even honestly care because most of them have no personality. Even like background characters who are just sitting there, that scene where the guy's being tortured in the I guess it was a club, and other women are just sitting there not moving or even looking panicked, and like they barely feel like people. And maybe that's a cultural thing. I'm not sure, but I just had a hard time connecting with this one. If I do happen to see it again, I will see if my viewpoint changes. So maybe if they make it Only God Forgives too.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. It's not the type of movie that looks like it's searching for a sequel. So it's one of those more modern movies that does crack my all-time favorite list, and I give the movie a 10 out of 10. Like I said before, it's got it's got some really great music, soundtrack. The cinematography is rather good, and it's just a really, I'd say, more of a unique type of movie that just tells a story without having to rely on too much dialogue, and I can see how that sometimes makes it more difficult to understand what's going on, but for me, I dug it.
Yeah, I'm not going to go on too much. It's a movie that did do it for me, and I don't know, I was hoping for something else than what I got. And maybe I missed some things, like Chucky says, maybe I should go read some additional material. But if the movie itself isn't something that gives enough context for what's going on within itself, I just question how much value that movie has. The movie looks nice and it has a nice soundtrack. It has a really decent cast, in my opinion. I mean, there's not many main characters, but other main characters do a pretty good job. It's just that none of them are worth caring about. The story's close to nonsensical at times, and there's, I don't know, I don't even know if God could forgive this movie. So it's a movie I'd probably give, for the time being, probably give it like a 2 out of 10.
I'm so disappointed in you.
I am okay with that.
Okay, well,
If you do not hear me on next week's show, this is why.
someone's getting their ass kicked.
Yeah, I'll say that's a difficult movie to talk about, and hopefully this next one will be a little more on the, I don't know, agreeing side. Next we have, I don't even know if enough people know about it to even be called a cult classic. We have a found footage movie titled House LLC from 2015. It's a pretty interesting movie. If you've seen found footage movies, you sort of know what to expect. Basically, some type of unexplained malfunction happens during sort of like one of those Halloween haunted house type things. And there's an investigative team trying to find out what actually happened that night. And so we get some sort of like news reports from that night and just different ideas from different people. And then one of the individuals who was involved in the crew to open that reveals some, I guess, behind the scenes footage of what went on behind the scenes building up to that night. And it's just sort of like it sort of goes back and forth, showing us what happens. The slow sort of, I don't know if you would call it supernatural happenings, but showing us what happens and what happens to the different individuals. We get multiple different points of view on sometimes the same scene. And it's one of those found footage movies that I think goes above and beyond what many found footage movies do. When it comes to horror found footage movies, I feel like many of them aren't that great. I feel like they follow sort of a somewhat generic formula, and I think if they follow that, it should be okay. But this one sort of spices things up a bit. And to be honest, I think it's probably one of the best found footage horror movies, at least that I've seen, in like the last 10 years. And it's sort of a shame that I do hear more people talking about this one, but before I praise it anymore, I'll let you go, Chucky.
I thought the movie was quite decent. Found footage movies in general, I think they're just somewhat limited. Like, I don't think the found footage genre is something that's capable of ever giving me like a 10 out of 10 movie. Of course, I'm happy if one comes along and proves me wrong, but I just think a lot of the things that I value in a movie just can't be done in a found footage movie, or would just make no sense to be in a found footage movie. Like we've discussed on some previous movies, a lot of the movies that I give a 10 out of 10 to, I think typically they always involve having really great music or a really good soundtrack. And this is something which I don't think has any music for obvious reasons. Or if it does, it's just, the credits or whatever, but...
It does have that one guy singing the song from What Happened to Baby Jane.
Yeah, but, it actually reminds me of, my father-in-law. Whenever he's over, he's watching... if he's watching a movie, whatever kind of movie it is, and you start hearing music in the background of a movie, he says... So, where's the band? Where's the person playing violin? He kind of jokes about it. So, but yeah, I mean, just some of the things that I value in a 10 out of 10 movie just would make no sense to even be in a found footage movie. I mean, why would someone in the background be playing scary violin music? I don't know, whatever. But, with that being said, I think this is one of the better found footage movies that I've seen. It's a genre that I really don't go out of my way to watch, and I think it's just because, like I said, it's very limited. I think even with the scares, I think there's some effective scares in this movie, but they are somewhat following the same formula, or they do become just a little bit repetitive. Like, they'll be focused on something, the camera will turn away, turn back, and now something's suddenly appearing. Or vice versa, it's there, they look away, they look back, and now it's gone. And that happens a lot in the movie. And it probably happens a lot in all found footage movies. But like I said, they are still quite effective, despite the somewhat repetitive nature of those type of scares.
I guess on a somewhat related note, I've seen this movie 3 times now. I watched it, I think 3 days ago. One thing that always stuck out to me was some really small things that you might miss the first time you're watching it, and then you watch it again and you see something else in the background, or window turning the camera, you just for a split second you might notice some type of shadow that may or may not be a human who wasn't there before. It's those very small things that I highly doubt you'll catch every single one the first time you see it. So from someone who's watched it 3 times, I sort of really enjoy. It's not really necessarily a new experience, but just knowing there's quite a bit in the movie that you may not see the first time. Another thing I just wanted to mention was, as some other scares like Chucky says might be repetitive, I sort of think they have a very effective feel to them. The whole thing with whether or not the clowns could turn their hearts or not, that was brought up multiple times throughout the movie. That's something I sort of really enjoyed, because it shows almost an increasing paranoia among the people, and closer and closer to opening the night, there's such high tension going on. So I know there's a lot about this movie, especially the characters, that really sort of stand out to me. And if you're hesitant about watching a found footage movie, I'd sort of recommend watching this one and at least giving it a try, seeing if it does anything for you. And if not, you can probably give up on the whole found footage style of movies.
They are. It's quite an effective movie for a found footage movie. There's only just so much you can do in this type of movie, I feel, and they did more than what the average one would do.
Now, out of interest, if I may ask, what other found footage movies stand up to this one in your eyes?
The only one that I can think of that jumps to mind is obviously the Blair Witch Project. Now, I have seen, I saw the Blair Witch Project in the theaters, and while I still don't overly love that movie. I think it's still, either the best or one of the best found footage movies, because they've done so much with so little. Now, I mean, there's some other ones, maybe Grave Encounters. I can't really remember it too well. Yeah, it's just, like I said, it's a genre of movies that I just have no confidence that I'm going to get anything better than a 7 to 8 out of 10 type movie. And this movie certainly on the better side of that. So,
yeah, I'll just say one more thing about this movie. I sort of like how there's some things that are known to some of the characters that are sort of cut from the audience. There's a whole sort of subplot that's alluded to a few times, but it's not really explained until the second movie. But when you watch this one, you can sort of catch on to what's going on. And in the movie, there's like only 3 characters who know this, sort of like a secret behind the scenes type thing. But it's sort of, I don't know, I sort of like how the audience doesn't fully know everything. They turn off the camera before they talk about this type of stuff, and to me, it just makes the movie feel just a little more real. It would not necessarily give in all the answers, and we're left guessing, hey, what's going on? And I think this movie did a pretty good job with that type of thing. When it comes to my views, I think this is probably one of the best found footage movies in at least the last 5-6 years. I have a hard time coming up with one I liked more than this one. I'll probably give this one an 8.5 out of 10, and I'd definitely round up to a 9. So it's definitely a movie I'd recommend to any fans of the horror genre, and hopefully you have a good time.
Well, I give the movie a 7 out of 10, which is a pretty decent rating for me. Slightly above average type movie. For a found footage movie, it's definitely one of the better ones out there. I had a good time with it. It's got some effective scares. It's just limited with the found footage genre itself.
So basically, when you have a found footage night, pretty much every movie's getting a below 6.
Well, outside of the really good ones, and I would say this is definitely one of the good ones. So yeah, I mean, certainly a 7 out of 10 is a pretty decent rating, I think. I guess the only last thing I wanted to say about it, I know the one guy who had invested a lot in this haunted house. He had his reasons to kind of stick around, but I tell you, if I was one of these other guys, after seeing some of these things, maybe after the second time, I'd be like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. I'm not coming back in this place after seeing, at least maybe 2 occurrences of really fucked up things happening.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite scenes is when this guy is talking to a clown and he thinks it's one of the guys in the house, and then he walks back to the guy who he thinks it is, and he just freaks out. And then they're watching the scene later, and they're like, "Whoa, what the hell is going on here?" And I know, I think that's probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and I definitely would not be staying there after that.
Anyways, moving on to a very classic horror film, Friday the 13th. Now, this is obviously the original one from, 1980?
Indeed.
Just like most slasher films, it's not an overly complex plot. A group of camp counselors trying to reopen a summer camp where a child had drowned many years ago, and of course they're stalked and murdered by this unknown person. This is the first movie in what I'd assume is the longest running horror franchise, at least in terms of movies or sequels. I don't mind the movie. I think there's certainly a suspense element to it when it comes to who's committing the murders, though that suspense is somewhat lost on repeat viewings. I definitely say it's the least entertaining movie in the series for me, not just because it doesn't have our hockey mask wearing Hulk of a maniac as per the sequels, but it just does some things that I don't particularly care for. Like the first person view of the majority of these kills I mean, when it comes to video games, I don't like playing them in first person view, and I guess with movies it's somewhat a similar thing. And I think some of the scenes, like, they come across these camp counselors and they say, "Oh, hey, it's you." And it just seems kind of silly that, like, they're clearly trying to avoid spoiling the person's name. It just doesn't seem 100% natural that they wouldn't say, "Oh, hey, that person's name," rather than say, "Oh, it's you." And yeah, I don't know. It's a little thing, but I mean, we talked about Sweet 16, what was it, a week or two ago, and that has first-person view kills, but that's a movie I enjoy irrespective of the kills, and I think with Friday the 13th, which has a couple of decent kills thanks to, Tom Savini's effects, but if you took the kills out of the movie, I mean, for me, there's not anything special to enjoy about the movie.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think there's necessarily anything special. I do think a lot of the characters, I think a lot of them are sort of fun. There's a lot of really, I don't know, sort of amusing scenes. One in which you're trying to sort of kill a snake, and it's just utterly ridiculous. They're all just jumping around, just trying to find the snake to kill it, and now they were just like messing around playing strip Monopoly. I don't know. This movie is one that when I was growing up, I said it quite a few times. So it's one that has somewhat nostalgic feelings for me. I agree that sometimes the first person thing, like, "Hey, how are you doing?" gets a bit much. And I think the movie probably would have been better solved if they had introduced the killer before the finale. Apparently, a lot of people, when this movie first came out in theaters, there was a decent amount of people who thought Crazy Ralph was the guy behind a lot of the killings going on. It's just, I know, from a modern day perspective, it sort of just blows my mind, because I feel like most horror fans know who's actually doing this stuff. I don't know. For me, a lot about this movie I really like. The teenagers just marching around, the one guy dressed up as an Indian when the police guy comes about. I think there's a lot of fun things in this movie. There's characters, some of whom aren't necessarily fully developed, but you still have a fun time with them. Tom Savini does a great job with the death scenes. And to be honest, there's very few death scenes in the movie that disappoint me. And there's some really great ones too. And especially like the last 30 or so minutes, there's some characters like running around in the rain, finding bodies, trying to find help, and I just really like that vibe. It's almost like a hopeless situation which they think finally gets fixed at the end, and then everything goes to hell. So I know it's not nearly as good as movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street or like Halloween. And like Chucky said, there's some sequels that are quite a bit better. Like Friday the 13th Part 4, which is probably one of the best movies in the series. But for sort of almost like a rip-off of the late 70s slasher success, I think Friday the 13th does a pretty good job.
And I like the dream sequence at the end, for anyone who's seen the movie knows what happens there, but
I'm sorry, I just wanted to point out, I actually think that's a better dream sequence than at the end of the original K, which you may disagree with, but I actually really like this one.
It's definitely not as good as Carrie's end sequence.
Definitely is, but okay.
Okay. For anyone who hasn't seen the movie, I'm guessing pretty much everyone has, but then again, there's some person out there who, maybe some young person who's just getting into horror, they haven't seen it. So if there's anyone out there who doesn't want it spoiled, maybe just not listen to what I'm just about to say for the next 20 seconds. But as we all know, the killer at the end, Jason's mother, I just don't find her to be anywhere near as interesting as Jason himself. And I think that's another big thing about the movie, that, I mean, it's not a bad plot twist, but I just don't see her being anywhere near as interesting as Jason is in any of the other sequels. So
I think if they had actually went more into her character, there could have been like maybe a little more potential. Like I said, if this individual was appeared early in the movie in any capacity, it might have brought a lot more positive feelings toward the end. When the movie just sort of shoehorns in a character at the very end, and or that's the mysterious killer, it leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Because there's no possible way if you're watching the movie you can suspect, oh hey, it's this character. So I don't know. In some ways, it just doesn't even seem right, even though I really enjoy the finale.
Of course, the music in the movie's quite good. Anytime you've got this iconic type of music created for a franchise, they've done well.
Yeah, I think the composer was it Herman Fradini, I think? Yeah, the guy who did the music was, I think, pretty top notch. And I'm not, unlike Chucky, I'm not one who usually notices, music a lot of times in movies. I'm generally more interested in, I don't know, either ghost, toy, or other things. But the music in this one, especially for a slasher movie, and slashers generally don't have stand-up music. I thought this one did a pretty fantastic job trying to sort of set itself apart from the crowd. The one of the characters we were introduced to in sort of like modern day times, I think her name was Annie. I thought she would have made a pretty compelling, I guess, main character, but then she's somewhat dispatched pretty early on, which was somewhat disappointing because I actually, every time I watch this movie, that character, I just sort of really like, she has just sort of a spunk to her, so it's always sort of disappointing that she sort of dies off so soon. Otherwise, I know, like I think a lot of the characters are sort of interesting, even if none of them are necessarily fully developed. This is a classic of the slasher genre, and I think it has really just a lot of great kills. I think there's a lot of good things going for it. I know that some people somewhat, look at this one as just almost like a rip-off of, like I said, like earlier slashers. Like, oh, hey, they made Halloween and now they just made Friday the 13th. This definitely isn't anywhere near as good as Halloween, but I do think it's a pretty good movie. And having seen this so many times as a kid, it's a movie that I have a hard time coming up with negatives about. So I generally give this one probably an 8 out of 10.
And just piggybacking off what you said with this not being as good as Halloween, which I agree. And as we know, I don't think Halloween's a fantastic movie. I think it's a very good movie, which I give Halloween an 8 out of 10. So with this not being anywhere near as good as Halloween, or at least not as good, I give this one a 6 out of 10. I could sometimes, because it's such a classic movie, or it's a movie attached to such a huge horror franchise, sometimes that tends to, I guess you could say, I could see myself giving it a slightly higher rating if I was persuaded to, but yeah, no, I'm going to stick with a 6 out of 10. I just don't think it's anywhere near as good as some of the sequels.
No, I do have a quick question for you. Is this a movie that you saw quite a bit when you were a kid, or is this like a later, like teenage type thing?
I didn't see any of the Friday the 13th movies until I was probably in my late teens. To be honest, I can't really remember which ones I watched first, but I definitely didn't watch them in order.
Yeah, I'll just say as a fan of the series, generally speaking, honestly, if you've seen like part 2, you've basically seen part 4. So
yeah, but part 4 is way better.
Yes, although I think part 2 is pretty good, but
yeah, part 2's okay, but yeah, part 4 is one of the better ones in the series, in my opinion.
So, Chucky, did you see Annabelle Comes Home Again?
Yes, I did.
Was it at least a more positive viewing experience than last time?
It was, but like my wife was saying when we saw it the second time, this movie tends to draw a particular crowd. I mean, we saw it on a Sunday night this time. We saw it originally on the Friday night, which just was a disaster because of all the idiots. And on the Sunday night, it still drew a fairly big crowd for a movie that's, in its second week. And on a Sunday night, the crowd overall was definitely a lot better. They stayed quiet for the most part, but yeah, still occasionally someone would kind of say something or do something slightly annoying.
This is a somewhat related note, actually. So for those of you who listen, you probably know I went to go see Child's Play, in theaters after it came out. So after, what's it, like almost a month now? It's finally coming out in my local theater. So that's fun.
Well, it's already out of theaters here, so
Yeah, and it's just now coming to my local theater, so I live in a great place. So.
yeah. Well, I mean, usually a movie, especially one that's got more than just a limited run, they usually stay out for about 4 weeks at minimum. Child's Play's it's already out of all my main theaters, and I have some fairly big theaters nearby, so for it to be out, 3 weeks after release is kind of surprising.
Although I have to imagine, I have no idea what the box office ratings for that one was, but I have to imagine it wasn't necessarily as high as people were hoping.
Yeah, well, like I said, when I saw it the very first session on day one of release, no one else was in the theater. It was just me and my wife, so that was a bit surprising.